As a very broad opening, I'm curious how you relate with the notion of influence. You could look at that in terms of causation, could look at that in the various ways that we participate in change. And of course, your work as a biologist and, what would you say, a sort of evolutionary thinker, but also engaging deeply with philosophy in order to situate your work, I think is a fair thing to say. I'm curious how you think about approaching the question of understanding just what influence is.
Well, I guess as an introduction, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, that primarily, I mean, I'm not enough, my day job is not a philosopher. I'm very interested in philosophy, of course, because I think it's an essential part of science. But just for everybody to know, my guess is we're going to get into issues here that people ask me about, and then I'll do my best. But my day job is at the intersection of biology, computer science, and cognitive science. And to the extent that those things are informed by philosophy and actually, I think, influence what philosophical perspectives make more or less sense to us, then I think we can do that. And so that also is a good lead into talking about criteria for the things that I say. So when we talk about a causation or philosophical frameworks for any of these kind of deep concepts, my primary requirement is that it facilitate this discovery and progress. And that doesn't mean necessarily making widgets and things like that, but it does mean a strong engagement with the empirical world. And that means that when we talk about various philosophical perspectives, whether it be materialism or dualism or different ways of looking at causation and influence and so on. My number one criterion is that whatever view you have, it helps us improve our understanding of the world in practical kinds of senses. And so that means new discoveries, new capabilities, opening up research programs into areas that before were unreachable or unavailable or just were invisible, actually. And I think that's really important because a lot of people will pick their philosophical framework first, and then they will sort of that colors then everything else. And they'll say, well, that can't be right because I'm a materialist or whatever. Or that's a category. They'll say things like, that's a category error. You can't say that because it's a category error. And then my point is always, well, these categories were not given to us by God. They were inferred by us thousands of years ago, and they have to change. They have to update with this, with where discovery takes us. So this is my view of things like deep issues like causation, whatever your viewpoint is. It has to be facilitative of new ideas, new discovery, new progress. And just the last thing to say about that is it's not just about the outside technological world, although we do have applications and a lot of applications in biomedicine, in bioengineering and AI. I mean, these are all great to sort of anchor these deep ideas in the world and show that yes, actually, this ideas like this kind of a mind being found everywhere through nature. These are not fluffy sort of poetic ideas. These actually lead to new inventions that are going to the clinic. So that part's very valuable, but that's not the extent of it. I don't view this primarily as a technological project. It's primarily about understanding ourselves, understanding our place in nature, understanding our capabilities, and understanding the transformative processes of which we can be a part. So it's very much both a first person and a third person science kind of thing. But that's just, that's the background to how I see these kinds of things.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, first person and a third person approach. A lot of what is emphasized in the voicecraft context is the second person, which has, is just as much of a mystery. I was wondering about the acronym you use in one of your recent papers, which is TAME, Technological Approach to Mind Everywhere. Could you share a little bit about what that means in the context of what you've said, which is that it's, you've just sort of qualified that this isn't just about technology in terms of what we can make in an external sense, but we're looking to involve an understanding of, well, would you say the nature of subjectivity? Is that the sort of thing which is interesting to you? I mean, I know that mind, of course, very much is. I'm curious about how we define that and whether or not, in your way of seeing, that has an overlap with the meaning of subjectivity. It would seem to me that there might be some important distinctions there. Of course, we can approach subjectivity from a number of perspectives, that might sit more on the psychoanalytic or phenomenological side, which certainly don't have an easy place in the language of sort of third person description of technological processes, nor of the kind of measurements and empirical work that need to be done in order to specify and make predictions about the behavior of systems in that regard. So how do you think about the role of subjectivity as it relates to mind, and then how technology relates to that? Yeah.
So I am very interested in subjectivity, consciousness, first person perspective, all that good stuff. My general strategy for the last 3 decades or so has been to not talk publicly too much about things until we have shown how we can make progress with them. And so actually in my lab, I haven't said too much. I've now said a couple of things, but I haven't said too much yet about subjectivity and consciousness and whatever, because what I want to do is to have the actual progress catch up to that. So I'm able to, for example, I'm able to talk about these kind of diverse intelligence topics and minds outside of brains and so on, because we've made a lot of progress on that, actually empirical progress, that it's quite obvious now where these ideas lead. And so now I can talk about all of this. Now, as of a few months ago, I'm starting to talk about the ingressions of patterns from Platonic space into the physical world. Again, couldn't talk about it for a long time. Now we're finally to the point where we can actually make sufficient progress on it that we can demonstrate why these things are useful. So the vast majority of my work has focused on what looks to be third person science. We study behavior and intelligence and problem solving and cognitive capacities as opposed to subjectivity, right? So the vast majority of my work is that, and it's not because I don't think those things are important. It's because I want to make sure that everything I say is strongly grounded in what I'm able to show is the reason I'm talking about all this stuff is here. This is the thing we were able to find because we had those ideas. Right. And that's how there are certain ideas that are sort of more fruitful than others. Yeah. And so the TAME framework was created in part by an impetus to provide a conceptual unification to the diverse intelligence field. So there are people who study human behavior and then mammals and birds and maybe an octopus and things like this, but I wanted to be able to talk about all intelligent all cognitive agents on the same spectrum. So we're talking about swarms, we're talking about novel beings that never existed before, so synthetic biology, AIs, whether software or embodied, potential alien beings someday, every possible kind of different embodiment, different origin story, every kind of cognitive agent. What do they all have in common? And so the TAME framework attempts to describe what that is and how we can think about minds entering into the physical world, scaling up and changing. It's called technological, not because this is all about making new what people normally think of as physical technology. The emphasis on technology and on engineering, and my background has a lot of engineering in it, and I think like an engineer. And the emphasis on technology and engineering is simply this: it forces you to specify why the beliefs you have are useful. That doesn't mean it has to just for making things that you're going to sell for practical purposes. That's not it. It's if these are tools to change yourself, and I think that's very important. That in third person science, you stay exactly the way you were before and after any given experiment, right? So you can remain exactly as you are as you do experiments, but that's not all of science. I think a huge part of science is the part where you change as part of what you've learned. And in particular, what you're modifying via technology is you. It's yourself. It's not physical systems on a bench in front of you. It's part of transforming ourselves and our cognitive systems. And so this is a technology that's both kind of has an outer manifestation and an inner. That's an important part of that project. But nevertheless, what it forces you to think about is what is the practical utility of whatever thoughts you have, because I think again there's a real tendency to pick philosophical stances first and then sort of have an allegiance to them and see everything colored in that way. And this is something I ask people all the time. They say, well, I don't like your continuum view. I think there are crisp binary categories. There are things that are alive and things that are not alive. I mean, this is a particular, axe that I grind all the time, that I think none of these terms are actually sharp, discrete categories. Or there are living things and then there are machines. And so my question is always, okay, and what has that done for you? Right, maintaining these ancient, propping up these ancient categories. Tell me what benefits that has led to. What have you discovered by using these concepts? Because I can tell you what I've discovered using a competing framework. So that's the part about technology and engineering, is having always looking forward. And it also, I think that idea also helps resolve some issues of reductionism and holism and things like that, because there are some very sort of clear ways to see that there's situations where reductionism, for example, isn't as much false as it has limited utility. It just doesn't provide the utility going forward as you would need. And so that's the technology part. And the other aspect where this shines through is the first. The major paper that preceded the TAME paper was this thing on the origin of selves. And one of the things that, or on the composition of cells, and one of the things that I propose in both of these papers is something called the spectrum. I call the spectrum of persuadability. And again, this is a notion that's designed to show what a continuum of cognition looks like, but specifically from an engineering point of view. And what that suggests is that as we have this spectrum, and why don't I describe the spectrum first? So imagine you've got this line left to right, and I'm just going to give you a couple of waypoints on this. Of course, it's very dense and it's probably not even linear, but I'll just give you a couple of waypoints. So you start off on the left, you have something like a mechanical clock. Okay, so this thing, you are not going to convince it of anything. You're not going to reward it. You're not going to punish it. The only tools that will actually work for you to change how the clock works, so with the interaction you're going to have with that clock, is some kind of a physical rewiring. So these are the tools of physics, of mechanics, things like that. Then you get to things like thermostats, and there something very interesting happens. These things have some so on the physics side, you have things that are able to follow gradients and go down hills and things like that, right? They follow energy gradients. Then you have things like thermostats. And there suddenly you find out that a whole new set of tools can be useful as an engineer. When you have a thermostat or any other thing, you ask, what can this thing autonomously do? How do I incorporate it into whatever I'm building? And so that requires you to understand the material you're working with and ask about its level of autonomy. What does this thing actually do? And so then you realize that now I can use concepts from cybernetics, from control theory, and ask about what does this thing believe about the current state? What are the memories it has about what the state should be? So the set points of the homeostatic cycle. And my intervention with it, right? When you change the set point for your thermostat at home, you don't really need to know how the heating or the cooling plant works. The only thing you need to know is that it is in fact a thermostat, and you need to know how to communicate to it changes of set point, right? Those are the things. It's quite different than when you want to change a clock, right? And then you get to things that some animals, but actually even gene regulatory networks do this, but they're trainable. So they can be trained with specific stimuli. And now the tools of behavioral science become valuable. And it turns out that you can do all sorts of things. Humans training dogs and horses for thousands of years before knowing zero neuroscience, basically, right? So you have a different way of interacting with, and then you move further and you have things like humans with whom you can have discussions and where they're motivated by reasons, and you can use concepts from psychoanalysis and friendship and love and all these kinds of things. So anyway, so you get the idea. That's the spectrum, and the thing about that spectrum is that what I proposed in that paper is that all the claims about items on that spectrum are interaction protocol claims. They're not claims about what the system really is. They're claims about how you plan to interact with it. And then we all get to find out how well that worked out for you. So if you have an object and you tell me, I think this thing has zero intelligence, or you say, oh no, I think this thing has a beautiful spirit full of hopes and dreams. What you're really saying is, what set of tools are you going to bring to bear to have a relationship with it? Is it going to be psychoanalysis? Because if you're bringing that to a clock, you're going to waste a lot of time. On the other hand, if you think you're going to do mechanical rewiring to an animal to get it to do things, you're going to be here till the sun burns out, trying to manipulate all the atoms in its in its neurons. That's really not the optimal way to do it. And so that turns the whole thing into what I think is valuable about that is that it turns the whole thing into an empirical effort. In other words, don't tell me that you think molecular networks are dumb and mechanical. Let's actually try training them and see what happens. And we tried that for the first time. Nobody had tried that before. We tried it. Turns out they're capable of Pavlovian conditioning and 5 other kinds of learning. And nobody had tried that because they had an assumption. The assumption was that you need to be some sort of a neural, complex animal in order to do these things. So that turns it into an empirical project. We can't assume these things. We can't assume they're mindless. We can't assume that there's a majestic spirit under every rock. We have to actually do the experiments and see. You have to tell me, here are the protocols I used, and here is the enriched interaction I had with it. But let's be very clear, because a lot of people confuse this, and I've gotten a bunch of flack actually from some people on that humanist side, is that, you want to reduce all this to technology. No, that's not the point. On the left side of the spectrum, it looks like what we recognize as physics and engineering and things like that. But the more you move to the right side of that spectrum, you get to relationships and interaction strategies that, first of all, change you as much as they change the system. It's not about rewiring somebody else. It's about being mutually open and vulnerable and allowing their ideas and the information that they're giving you to influence you. That's the whole point of interacting with things on the right side of that spectrum, right? And then you get into things like love and friendship and everything else. So these very, very rich interactions where it's not you're not trying to exert unidirectional control. You're trying to benefit from someone else's agency, and you are both changed by that interaction, which hopefully doesn't happen when you're rewiring a clock as much. So that's, it's technology, not in the sense that it's made to be mechanical or limited to physical objects. It's technology in that you have to consistently ask yourself, am I using the right level of abstraction in interacting, and how are we both benefiting? And what is our actual, who's being changed by what, and is it in a positive way? And if not, then we can readjust.
Yeah, that's an awesome response. There's so much scaffolding for thought there, and it provides a really comprehensive way to think about influence, which was my first question. And you're sort of articulating the various domains or levels or contexts in which you can interact in this way or that way. And the result will be obviously very different depending on what you bring of your process to that. Yeah, fascinating. So many ways to go, but one of the things I'm curious about is what you find yourself bringing to interaction. I mean, I don't know why this popped into my mind, but Jurassic Park is an example of the kind of engineering, creation, kind of both, sort of, in which it was possible to obviously bring dinosaurs back in the movie, radical entrant into the context, and lots of stuff happened. There is a sense in which, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, the possibilities and the capacities that your work is opening up is a very profound capacity to influence, interact, participate in the signaling at levels that we previously could not, which are producing, well, it's opening up our understanding of the kind of modularity of, well, biology and its creative potential, capacity on the one, from the potential for regrowing limbs to organizing novel forms of what you've called xenobots and anthrobots and these sorts of things. Do you see that as opening up a novel vector for the creation of entities / minded beings? And then I'm curious about the orientation we have as beings that fills us with the curiosity to see if that kind of thing is possible. And then I wonder about our part of a broader collective process of discovery and creation that has, after many thousands of years, brought about the potential to create this type of thing. So there's a nesting of influences and desires and goals in all of that. And then there's a few questions in there around how you relate to, I suppose, the novelty of the creation that your work is opening up, and also what is it that you find yourself, how you find yourself changing in relation to that. There was that piece around your own involvement in the process, and I'm curious about that.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, this idea that we're creating these novel beings. So I think, and this is a long, kind of long discussion, and we can talk about that as well. But I don't think we create any of these things. In fact, I don't think we don't create beings at all. We don't create minds. What we do at best is participate in their ingression into the physical world by making, whether it be having babies and making embryos, or making various kinds of machines or biobots or hybrids or whatever we do, we're providing an ingression interface for patterns that already exist in some important sense. I don't think we make any of these things, but in any case, the project as a whole is around being able to recognize and mutually beneficially interact with unconventional minds that are around us that are very hard for us to notice. So my contention, for many reasons, is that there are beings of very different origin, composition, and properties all around us. We, because of our own evolutionary firmware, have a really hard time recognizing them. We're obsessed with the three-dimensional world as the kind of playground for this action perception loop, but it actually happens in many other kinds of spaces. We are mostly focused on medium-sized objects moving at medium speeds through three-dimensional space, and we can recognize those things that are too small, too big, too fast, too slow, things that operate in weird problem spaces that are hard for us to visualize. We have I think it's a kind of mind blindness. Like we don't see those things, but we can make tools just like we used to be completely oblivious to large parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. But in fact, I think the spectrum is actually a pretty good analogy because of two reasons. One is that we were naturally blind to most of it. And two, different various phenomena, magnets, static electricity, lightning, light, we thought those were all different things. And we thought they were categorically different things. Prior to a proper theory of electromagnetism, somebody would have told you light is just completely different than static electricity, or than what happens when you wave a magnet around. These are just different things. And now we understand, no, they're manifestations of the same thing. We have a deeper understanding that allows us to unify phenomena. And that allows us to make technologies which now enable us to explore other aspects of that space that are naturally invisible to us, right? And so I think that is exactly the project of diverse intelligence, is to provide a unified understanding where we see that things that a molecular network is doing, things that a thermostat is doing, and things that we are doing, and things that presumably larger minds are doing, are all on the same spectrum. And that what we're looking for is not binary categories, but actually a good understanding of transformation. How did we all get to be the way we are, and what else is possible? So that brings so the simplest where we start with that which is already very strange to people, and it's been a real difficult effort kind of getting that into the world, but it's coming, and it can't be stopped because of the biomedical implications, is the cognition of our cells and tissues. So our cells, tissues, organs, and even the molecular networks inside of them are very profitably addressed using the tools of behavior science and cognitive neuroscience, and that is starting to show us how we can relate to and we communicate with and rewrite the memories of somatic tissues as applications in cancer, birth defects, and regenerative medicine. And so that's one kind of unusual mind that operates in anatomical and physiological space instead of three-dimensional space. And so on, that allows us to practice these tools of communicating with diverse intelligences, but it gets way weirder than that. And so, I think what we're doing goes way beyond biology. Biology is a subset of cognition, I think. And we can use these same approaches once we sort of get comfortable doing this kind of thing. We can, and we have been using these approaches to address some very unusual kinds of minds that are not embodied in the way that we typically think about. And from the purpose of influence, I think the goal of a lot of this is to have more control over our future selves. In other words, for each of us, I think part of the influence that we hope to have is not just an influence laterally on other beings, but an influence on your own future self. So if you think about the slices of your being extended through time, right, kind of like the special relativity story of being slices, then anything, the memories you have are messages from your past self. Okay, the memories in your brain and body are messages that were left by your past self that you need to interpret. You don't have to interpret them the way that your past self interpreted them. You could change the story at any time, and that's a huge aspect of our freedom, is to reinvent the meaning of our past, to do things differently in the future. But at the same time, anything that you do now is a message and a constraining effect on your or a liberating effect on your future self. Right. And so you are forming messages, and you are shaping, you're doing niche construction to your environment and your cognitive system and your body, so that future you will have different possibilities open to it than current you. And so that aspect of influence, that I think too is a huge part of the freedom that we have. It's not the immediate freedom of being able to choose my next thought, because I think that we largely don't have. What you do have is the ability to apply consistent effort to make sure that you have statistically different thoughts in the future by education, the anger management, meditation, spiritual practices, whatever it is. What you're doing is altering the kinds of thoughts you're going to have in the future. And it comes from concerted effort, right? And the ability to change your future because you are exerting influence on future self, not just on others. And so that, again, I think is a huge part of this project. And the biomedical side, just to say one last thing, the biomedical side of it, I think goes hand in hand with this, because I think, at least for me, what I think the end game of all of this is what I call freedom of embodiment. So right now, everything about each of us, including our propensity for various diseases, our ability to have certain kinds of thoughts, in other words, our cognitive apparatus, our IQ limits, our age span, all of these things are basically, to a large extent, the outcome of cosmic rays hitting various embryonic cells during development, going all the way back in history. I don't believe that any of that was guided towards things that we hold as our values. Okay, and that means that what we ought to be doing is not just dealing with whatever we've been handed down, but now that we're able to do it, we should be very intentional and very thoughtful about what our embodiment should be. And I don't just mean, although I include this kind of transhumanist kind of stuff about increasing our capabilities, but of course, the completely untenable embodiment that a large portion of the world is having today because of various biomedical limitations and all the suffering that's out there for for people that have been born into a body that does not match their capabilities. And so I see all of this as a project, both physically, but very importantly, mentally and spiritually, around having intentional influence on what we are going to be in the future and what the point of all the blood, sweat, and tears are in terms of being an embodied agent, and why we're doing this and what we're able to do in the future.
Yeah, thank you for that response again. It's really comprehensive. On your initial clarification around our role in creation, not so much a role in creation, but a participation in creativity and participating in the ingression of novel forms into being, as distinct from creating ex nihilo some totally different. I'm with you there. That makes sense to me. That's also the only way I can make sense of creativity, really. Now, there's a couple clarifications that I'd like to make, which I'll ask now and then see if I can respond to a little bit of what you shared as well, just so you know there are things I'm seeking clarification on. One is sort of how whether or not, because in what I was reading in your work, I knew I'd need to read a lot more to be absolutely certain of this, because I couldn't find the exact places of clarification I was looking for. But I'm curious about how you define intelligence in relation to cognitive process, whether or not those are more or less synonymous, because they can sometimes in many contexts show up synonymously. I'm wondering if one is a more narrow instance of a broader category. And because I understand in your framework, they are both to do with the capacity to pursue goals given a well-defined domain. Something like this, you might want to specify, and please stop me now if that's going to take us too far off track.
Let's just talk about that for a second before we go on to the next thing. So here's what I would say. I would say that intelligence is a subset of cognitive properties. It's the one we've been focusing on in our empirical work, the problem-solving capacity, the ability to reach the same goal by different means when circumstances change. So this is kind of a William James definition of intelligence. Very cybernetic, doesn't say you have to have a brain, doesn't say what space you're solving these problems in, but ability to reach the same goal through different means. I think it's a subset of cognition because while it's a very fruitful and useful definition to work with, I don't think it captures everything. So, for example, it doesn't capture play. It doesn't capture goal exploration that doesn't have an immediate goal of any kind. It doesn't capture the search for novelty, the search for meaning. These kinds of things. I think these are all cognitive things that are not part of intelligence per se. They're not things that I focused on because I don't know how to make empirical discoveries out of those concepts. So I've kind of stayed away from that in the day-to-day work. But they're certainly there, and that's why I think intelligence is a subset of cognition.
Okay. Yes, that's an important clarification. Yeah. Okay. So the general goal that you named of, if I paraphrase how I've integrated it, is as the search for and cultivation of capacity to improve self, improve the context of self. Well, in a sense, we are, please.
Well, I just to say, I mean, I think that's fair, but I want to be clear about this concept of improvement, because people sometimes get worked up about that too. I'm not suggesting that there's some external notion, or that I'm providing some notion of what it means to be, some sort of scale where says some kind of thing is better than some other. I'm not making any of those claims. What I'm saying is it should be intentional, and it should be You should change because you wanted to change, because you had the goal and the know-how to make those changes, not because you didn't know what was going on. You had no ability to alter what your mind and body do, and you're just sort of riding along as a puppet of forces you don't understand. So that is what I'm, I think we should be fighting against. It's not a notion of a uniquely some sort of identical way to improve for everybody. I'm not trying to put everybody on the same, path by any means. I'm just saying we should be intentional about it.
Right, I understand that. So toward intention and agency, now they are to care about intentionality and to care about not being enslaved, in effect, and maybe blind to one's own enslaving. That would seem to be taking an affirmative position of value, which I would also take. There's a sense in which that would be better than not. The reason I say this is because I want to link to one of the other key points you made. And just to clarify, first of all, it seemed as though you were saying that in the evolutionary sort of cosmic through to evolutionary picture, and there's questions, of course, depending on how one relates to the history of the universe. I know you've had number of dialogues with Matt Segal, who will often speak from a perspective influenced by Whitehead, and Whitehead famously says that physics is the study of the smaller organisms and biology the study of the larger organisms. And so you have this continuity, at least in terms of how he's using the language there, and there's language and process for seeking to articulate that continuity. There's questions around for many, there's questions around where value comes into the picture. And I heard you articulating something that sounded like a more or less, from the perspective of values, sort of maybe at best stochastic kind of process, as in there comes a certain point where we look back and we can't just, I forget exactly how you languaged it, but we can't see through the particular set of constraints and happenings which afforded the conditions for complex life to develop, to retrieve and find a guidebook, in a sense, for the values we should seek to cultivate. That there's a sense in which value as such, at the level at which we experience it as human beings, we want to say things about goodness or beauty or justice, love, and these sorts of things, that there comes a particular, if not point, then span of complexity on the continuum of time where such possibilities come into being. Is that how you see things? In your perspective, is value something which comes about or emerges somewhere quite far ways down the evolutionary or cosmic progression?
No, in a sense, and again, I make pretty much everything into a spectrum. And so when we say value, we can talk about sort of metacognitive human values, where you know what your values are and so on, all the way down. No, I think value is pretty primary, because what happens even for very simple systems is, and this is formalized in the notion of polycomputing that Josh Bongard and I have been developing, where what you have in any system is a large, possibly infinite collection of observers, subsystems that are sensing and acting and in the world, and when they perceive various things happening, so specific, so for example, in the cell there are certain things going on and certain physical things going on, and there are subsystems which are other cells, components of the molecular machinery, and so on. Just then as an example, all of which observe the exact same physical events, but they see different things. In other words, they can assign different meanings to different computations, different meanings to the memory traces, different computations to the physical processes. So multiple observers see the exact same thing. They interpret it entirely differently. And it's not the case that some are more deluded than others and they get to see parts of the real ground truth of what's going on. I don't think there is that. What basically everybody's perspective on what's going on is valid to the extent that they can use that perspective to do something interesting going on into the future. And so that means that your choice of as an agent, all the way from the bottom up, your choice of what you're going to observe, what you're going to ignore, how you're going to process what you see, and and what story you're going to tell, because ultimately it's all about, I think, sense making and storytelling is, again, scaled even molecularly all the way up, in terms of self models and world models and so on. The story you tell about what's going on, which is going to guide how you act in the future, which is going to guide what measurements you take, what interpretations you make, and again, how that modifies your story, right? So it's very it's just like autocatalytic, but also a self-referential loop. All of that is not determined by the stuff that's going on. It's something you bring to it. It's affected by it, but those are, I think, very important. Those are values in terms of what you assign priorities to, how you prioritize things, how you decide which things you're going to observe, ignore, process, and so on. And that whole, one of the most interesting things is to think about is this idea that each of us, as a time extended being, at any given moment, you don't have access to the past. If you don't know what happened in the past, what you have access to are engrams, memory traces in your brain and body that were left for you as messages by your past self. And so at any given moment, you are continuously reconstructing the story of who you are, what that means, what the outside world is like, and what you're going to do in the future. And that forward-looking creative process of continuously having to decide, what am I and what was my past like, and more importantly, what do I want to have happen in the future? All of that is guided not by the immediate facts on the ground, the micro states of whatever's going on right now, but the perspective you take. And I think all of this is about battles of perspectives, different perspectives that can be taken on physical observations. All of that, you can say, those are the values, the things that guide the things that guide how you're going to interpret your memories and how you're going to undertake future actions given the past. Those are all values. So I think that's absolutely primary, and they go right to, it goes right to the bottom.
Yeah, right. So that's how it seems to me, although I really enjoyed hearing you share that perspective, because that is an awesome way to think, that relation between the past and our participation in the recreation of it. A question I have in relation to that, and also this would bear on our processes of discernment around what kind of selves we wish to cultivate, in what direction of becoming, or rather what orientation of becoming, humanity can aspire to choose. You mentioned transhumanism. On the podcast, we've been speaking over the years with Carl Hayden Smith, who's a very interesting thinker, and he has a term, hyperhumanism. I don't know if you're aware of Carl, but he's fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah, fascinating guy, and he uses the term hyperhumanism. And there's other ways to get at this idea. He uses hyperhumanism to point toward the kind of technologies which enhance the quality of human being and the quality of human becoming. there is often a critique made of transhumanism, and in general, this is how I've come to know the notion that there is an appeal to the creation of capacities which, on the one hand, while seeking to solve maybe problems or lacks we face, that they may tend to do so in a way that atrophies or negates in a effacing way, to borrow a term from a philosopher O.G. Rose, that negates in the sense of effaces capacities for experience and valuation, which we do in fact really value as human beings. And there's a really deep set of questions in there when it comes to how we participate together in the mutual discernment around the creativity we are and are bringing into the world through technology. In what way can the truths we come to learn, even if they may, and I appreciate one of the sort of, you referenced William James and sort of pragmatism there as something which definitely makes sense to me as a way to continually reground our process of relation with understanding and creating in reality. But the thing I'm circling around is, perhaps it's the kind of, maybe it points towards the social processes of whether it's mutual inquiry. You've mentioned sort of the cultivation of self-knowledge and the recognition of the importance of the transformation of the self as part of the process of creating technology. On the cusp, really, of, and more than the cusp, it feels like we're kind of over the crest of a number of waves of real powerful change. Artificial intelligence, the different kinds of weaponry in a tremendously interconnected world. I'm curious about how you relate to the process of discerning what is worth creating and what kinds of contexts are worth making. There's so many things wrapped up in there, and in the end I felt I kind of returned to something a little slightly more broad than what was on the initial pulse, but there's a few things in there anyway.
Yeah. I'm certainly not going to tell anybody else specifics of what they should and shouldn't want to change. But I do want to say two things. One is this. Let's just talk about the transhumanism for a moment. I think it's absolutely true that you can't just simply pile technology onto things and assume everything's going to get better. And absolutely, you can make technological and biological changes that are actually going to, where you're going to lose things you had before. But let's just be clear, because a lot of those kind of discussions start off with a standard modern adult human as the baseline. And then you're talking about, well, then people say, well, should we change it or not? Maybe we should just stay human. But let's remember, we have a long history, and compared to our hominid ancestors, we are in many ways we are super beings, and it's entirely possible for somebody to make the argument that, look, it was better when, and I don't have any idea what the numbers would actually be, but at some point we had far lower IQs. And someone might say, look, this IQ around the modern 100 is a total hindrance. Language, the use of language made you forget how to do things that you used to know how to do. All of this business of setting bones and having glasses and using fire to cook your food, like all of this has taken you away from your natural state. And so all of this is shouldn't have been. We should go back to a state where we were early hominids, and then that should be how it should go. So I just want to be clear that there isn't anything magical about our current modern adult human status. We have a long history of being other. And if you're going to make an argument that you shouldn't make advances, you need to be able to specify why this point. Why not, 200,000 years ago? Why not a million years ago? How far back do you want to roll back these kinds of changes? So that's really important, that you have to specify where your optimum is, because there's no reason to say that it's where we are today. We have all kinds of bells and whistles on our somatic and cognitive structure that weren't here before, and maybe some of those are problematic too, right? So that's the first thing, is that if you're gonna make an argument for where we should have stopped, you might need to go quite further than you can't just say, well, 1800s technology, that's where we're going to freeze it. Like, well, how about go back before that if that's what you want to do. So that's the first thing. And the second thing to be aware of is when I think about transhumanism, the idea isn't to get away from being human. The idea is to ask, what is it that we value about being human, and what are the limitations on that? And most importantly, it's to ask us, what do we actually mean when you say you're human? What does that actually mean? People now, because of AI, people are working on proof of humanity certificates and things like this and it's untenable for many reasons, but one of the things that I would just kind of want to run through some possible things that you might care about so you're going on a 30-year journey somewhere, maybe going to Mars or whatever, and you get to pick some other being that goes with you. Roomba, kind of too boring. Dog, pretty good. But you want a human. So right, to really, have a good relationship for 30 years. Okay. What do you want, when you say you want a human? Is it the genome? Are you interested in the genetics? I don't know about you. I don't care about the genetics. Do you want the normal complement of human organs? Like it had, like you don't want a cyborg. You don't want somebody with different organs. I don't care about any of that either. What do you actually want? What do we mean by human? Well, what I think we mean is you want at least. So I'm sure there's a lower bound. There could possibly be an upper bound too. You want to have a minimal degree of a cognitive light cone in terms of compassion. What it means to be a human is to have a minimal capacity to have goals that go beyond oneself and to care about others. Okay, and this idea of the cognitive light cone is actually really important, because if you tell me that the scale, what the definition, by the way, that I came up with for this thing is, it's the scale of the largest goal you can work towards. So if you tell me that the largest goal you can work towards is the concentration of sugar in a little 10 micron spot, I'm going to say probably a bacterium. So that's a kind of goal that's suitable for a microbe. If you tell me that you can maintain a goal on the scale of hundreds of yards and maybe a couple of hours or a couple of days forward and back, I'm going to say you're probably a dog. So in the sense that your goals are larger, but you're never going to care what happens 3 towns over 2 weeks from now. It's just not possible for you. It's outside your look. If you tell me that you are working towards world peace and you care about and you're working to improve the financial markets for hundreds of years after you're gone, probably you're a human. And if you realistically, and I believe you tell me that you are able to care for in the linear range, not just sort of talk about it, but actually care in the linear range for all the beings on Earth the way that others can care about their family members, then I'm going to say you've got to be something beyond standard human. You must be some kind of bodhisattva or some kind of future mind, because your cone of compassion is actually bigger than what a standard human can muster, right? And so that is what I think you mean when you say human. What you mean is you have a minimal size on the kind of care and compassion that you can bring to the world, and we need to have some sort of an impedance match on it, right? So we have to have roughly similar cones for certain kinds of relationships, and so when I say transhumanism, I don't mean quit being human in favor of gadgets you attach to your body. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the amazing thing that we have established as humans to have larger cones of cognition and compassion, why stop here? The thing that's great about where we are now is that we now have the capacity. We've reached a scenario where it's like looking at the scale of technology over time. So for hundreds of thousands of years, it's almost flat. This kind of stone axe, a slightly different kind of stone axe, and then boom, it goes up like this. Once you've figured out the process of science and whatever, it just like completely verticalizes. And so great. We're now at a point where we actually understand what it is to have a cognitive light cone and what it is to have compassion and being able to relate to others. And we can now start to be intentional about how much we want to grow that. So that's what I'm talking about. It isn't just about technology. It isn't just about living longer or being free from dumb diseases that currently impact and limit your potential. It's about understanding what we really value about being a human and scaling that up to as much as you want to.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying the cultivation of the capacity to perceive value is intrinsically bound up with that enhancing or widening or deepening of the cognitive light cone. You mentioned compassion and what have you, but there's obviously a notion of care in there.
Yeah. And we actually have a couple papers on care with some Buddhist colleagues that I work with. We have a couple papers on that aspect of it specifically. But yeah, I think that's fair. I think getting to the point where you can now reason about your values, right? Because for simpler systems that's very hard or impossible. But now that we are to the point where we can have a metacognitive perception of our values, and you can ask, what are my values? What should my values be? Am I acting in accordance to my values? What are the limits? What's actually preventing me from acting in accordance to my values? Because many things are limitations of IQ, right. Bacteria susceptibility to bacteria and viruses, brain degenerative disease. All of these things are preventing us from living up to our values in many cases, and these things can potentially be removed. And that is a huge responsibility, but it's also kind of I think the point, it's what makes it all worthwhile, is this ability to circle back and to ask, why did I take that perspective on what happened? And could I have taken a better, more fruitful perspective? And what do my memories mean? And can I tell a better story of what they mean? And what should I be doing in the future? And why am I going to exert all of this effort? Exerting will is effortful. It takes energy. And why am I going to struggle and exert will over the next however many decades? For what purpose? And so overall, being able to think about all those things, I think is incredible, and it gives us a massive responsibility to do exactly that.
Right. And can we build technologies and create contexts which support that process rather than narrow us in ways that can prevent us from returning to ask those questions?
That's right. And technology doesn't just mean and I apologize, in a few minutes I'm going to have to run. Technologies doesn't just mean gadgets, meditation techniques, and tools for self-exploration and ways of thinking, and in general, education and psychoanalysis. All of these things are technologies,
Right. Well, we'll have to park the conversation about technology and Platonism and all of that, and then up into the social process. That was a beautiful beginning, and I'm grateful for your time. So thank you
so much. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.